had a big week. I saw Andre give a lecture or a little talk, or that one
Oh,
we were talking about. That was great. That went well. Um,
Apart from the fact I couldn't see the right-hand side of my screen, Mike, and my mouse cursor disappeared. So I couldn't read the quotations
that
that
was
I
a
was
bummer.
putting up.
That was
Yeah,
a
I had
bummer.
to just kind
beautiful.
of
Technical
guess the right-hand
difficulties, best
side.
things ever. Yeah.
Tell you what. And then Siri kept listening in
I
as
know. I
well.
saw that. Yeah.
Did you see that? Like Siri,
Yeah.
Siri kept saying, "I'm sorry, I did not understand that." And I'm like, "Siri, back off,
Because you
Siri.
were
Now's not the
activating
time."
it. You were activating it with the term spiritual or something. I noticed that you were saying spirituality, and it was like you're saying, "Hey Siri," or something. And I was like, "What is triggering that the whole time?" And then the other thing that was happening was that everyone was like leaving their mics on. Who
Classic.
see, had a bunch of people just like who weren't muted on the conference. So anyway, that was interesting. But otherwise,
There you
really
go.
good content. So I don't know if they recorded it, but we'll put a link if they did.
They did
Um,
not record it. I
they
can tell
didn't
you that.
record it.
No, they don't record it.
No ways. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's deliberate. They don't record it because of like the Q&A
Questions and
afterwards, and it
okay. He
becomes
just
like
records
an
It's the
talk.
issue.
living word
Yeah,
in the
you got to
moment.
be there in person. You miss
Got
it,
it.
you miss out. That's
It's
it.
like Lloyd Jones doesn't believe in recorded sermons.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why everyone listens to them.
Yeah. I
Believes in
know.
written sermons.
Like all of his sermons are recorded. We listen to them all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But
there was sanity in Lloyd Jones. It was. It was like the pulpit should be bigger. We should just
Yeah.
go back to the Genevan gown, obviously.
Geneva Gown.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Guy
and
was a
for,
genius.
for heaven's sake, can we just stop
Yeah.
recording the sermons?
And let's not do any pastoral counseling. Everyone should just listen to the sermon and not bring me your problems.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a
and
really
just
good
go do
pastoral
it.
model.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Every pastor agrees.
just
Hundred
stop
percent.
it. You
We
just listen to the sermon and you stop it.
That's it.
That's
stop
it.
it and apply the sermon. You
Just
know,
apply the
I
sermon.
mean, that's
Yeah,
what the sermon's for.
yeah.
Yeah, we give Lloyd Jones our stamp of authority, our
Yeah.
stamp of approval.
Approval.
Yeah, approval,
Approval.
not authority. He gives us
Yeah.
his stamp of authority. Um, so Nick's been busy as well. He's been on his cycle like most of the week.
Oh yeah, Mike. So you've taken up a new sport, haven't you?
I have. I sent. So Nick tells me, all right, you got to get on this little cycle thing, like one of those like old trashy little tiny, not fancy, small little seat ones. You got to get on those cycles, and you just got to like cycle for an hour. That's what you got to do, right? Every day.
Grind away
So I'm
every day.
like, I get on like 1 minute, like my back is aching. I can't even feel my butt. It's like my legs are, just
Yeah.
cracking in weird ways. And I'm like, sending him, I'm like, oh my goodness, I must have been on you 2 hours. It's like 1 minute. And I'm like, so I send him a text going, what the heck? This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I don't know. Some people can
I'll
do
be
it. Some
honest with
people
you. If I
can't.
get on a bicycle, I just worry about my prostate the whole time. The whole time. I can't get past it. I'm just like, this can't be good for you. Like it's right up there.
I
That
know.
saddle,
It's just, it is
Horse
Just
riding, right?
the
You made
most
for it.
unnatural thing in the world. No, but at least the horse riding, you could like stand up on the.
You got to stand
You
while
know,
you're cycling. You got to give yourself a break.
well, yeah, well, maybe, but I mean, that's a lot. Standing up it's a lot. I just think lifting weights is just it's better for your prostate. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's probably
It's not
true.
your hernia.
I just
So the whole okay, we can talk about cycling later. I've got questions. I've got many questions. But what we want to do is press on in from where we left off last time. This will drop after the one, okay. So, anyways, I realize you guys haven't seen that the previous one has come out, but it will drop tomorrow or today or something. And then we will move on to what we're looking at now, which is still in chapter 3 of the book. So we're dealing with Covenant Lord, Cultic Boundary. That's the book we're looking at for a while now. We will do. We're still in chapter 3, which is Meredith Klein's, just a big sort of expose of Meredith Klein's theology. So it's central. It's obviously the reason why everyone pays the ticket. So we want to carry on with our discussion. And now we're looking really at the exciting part, I think, in many ways, which is to trace this whole thing through in the Covenant of Grace, right?
Definitely.
That's how we round this up. I suppose we still have to talk about how it's relevant for two kingdom theology. That's kind of a helpful point of connection as well. But anyways, let's just think a little bit about how, because what we did was, all right, we've looked at, if you're following us all the way back from the series, we've touched on the covenant of redemption, the Pactum Salutis. And we've spoken about the way that there is in the Genesis 3:15 text, a kind of the first hint at what God has planned from eternity. There will be this seed who comes, who does the work, right, that Adam failed to do. And so that we would class as the work of Christ, the covenant of redemption, the next covenant of works, as you might think of it, as they parallel each other.
Yeah.
But then in the same, the one way to look at it is that you think about the seed there that's spoken of as the singular, right? So the singular seed who is coming is Jesus, who will do the whole thing again for us, except succeed where Adam has failed. But then we got to think about the seed plural, right? Because that it's a collective noun. It can be used in both senses. There is this ambiguity and intentional, I would say, nuance in the whole thing, in that the seed will come from the seed. The seed will, there will be a war also between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, right? Collective sense, the regenerate and the unregenerate, the warring that takes place starting off with Cain and Abel all the way through the Bible, really right to the book
and
of
you see that
Revelation.
ambiguity in the kind of seed and seed all the way from Genesis 3:15, don't you? With the talk about Eve's descendants, but then also he, the sudden switch to the he will crush your head.
Exactly.
And so you've got that kind of both in view all the way through.
Yes, absolutely. And that's very helpful to, I think, you could see how that would be a potentially confusing point. But another place that comes up and where Paul really draws on that is in Galatians, right?
Yeah.
Where he starts to say, well, by the way, seed obviously meant this, and he just sort of breaks it down.
Yeah,
and
it's like,
how
as
you
we
guys
all know.
Yeah. So, pulling on the same sort of grammatical concept as well as the theology that's been implicit through, but ultimately had the Messiah in view the whole time. So anyway, what we want to do then is work through the seed plural, seed, the community of that develops around the promise, the covenant of grace, which is the earthly administration of this decree in eternity. We as Baptists, I suppose, immediately we would say take a slightly different approach to Klein, who would see the need to distinguish a covenant of redemption from a covenant of grace, because you could go in and out of the covenant of grace, and there is let's leave out Klein for a second and just take standard Presbyterian theology or Reformed theology. You can be part you and your seed, right? So you are, the community is formed, and then you might deny the faith or whatever it is, and then you can sort of leave the covenant of grace, but that didn't necessarily mean you were ever in the covenant of redemption. So there's a kind of earthly administration, right? And we would say, yes, there is an earthly administration in the Old Testament as far as it's typological. But then, what you have in the new covenant is really something that is far more closely aligned with the covenant of redemption itself. Now, with that in mind, the first sacrament that was given, the promise, the fall happens, right? Then the promise happens.
Yeah.
And then there is this Genesis 3:15 thing, right? That is now the Adam has uttered his confessional amen to in naming Eve, as Klein says. Right, there he is. He's now said, we deserve death, and yet behold the mother of the living, right? Because of this thing. And then in response to that, you have the shedding of blood and the offering of the clothing, which is, important because they were naked, but more than that, it was a kind of sacramental strengthening of this confessional amen. So I really like the way he brings that out, because that really is the dynamic of all covenant of grace administration through the sacraments, really, right there. I mean, to the degree that these things are given, they strengthen the promise and that confessional amen. So that sort of sets us off on how the covenant community is really formed. Those who would believe the promise, believe the necessity, that there was the need for a blood sacrifice and a covering that would come through the promised seed, right? This is what would set the initial covenant community apart. And that, I think, does explain what's going on with Cain and Abel, because he brings the fruit of his own hands, the work of the which otherwise would be fine. But because the thing that set them apart was that sacramental sort of blood sacrifice promise, it does not explicitly, but it does, I think, implicitly show that part of the problem there was not only that he didn't have enough faith or something, but they actually cast off the need for blood sacrifice as their hope.
Yeah, because you often, when people are explaining that, they'll often go to Hebrews 11 and say the issue there was faith. So like Jim Hamilton does that, for example.
Yes.
So he won't see any significance in what the sacrifice was. He just says, Hebrews 11 says it was faith.
Yes.
But there's no reason to put those two against each other, because it could have been the issue of faith meant that the inappropriate sacrifice was offered. I mean, I think that Klein's view is backed up by two significant things. So the one is that if you look at the Levitical system, you would never, if you look at the opening chapters of Leviticus, you would never, everybody reading Genesis would know that you would never bring a grain offering
without blood as well. Yeah.
Without blood. You have to bring either a sin offering,
or without salt,
or a burnt offering. Yeah. So you can't just come with your grain. Like you can't, everybody would be like, when they hear about Cain doing that.
Yes, right? Yes. Good. Yeah.
But the other thing is, that Mike Morales, his thing about the translation issue of sin crouching at your door. Have you heard that?
Yes, I have, but I forgot.
So basically saying that, listen, where would they be bringing these sacrifices? Where are they bringing them?
Yes.
They're bringing them to the gates of Eden.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Because where else would you go? So they're right at the door.
The flaming sword, effectively,
Exactly, the flaming sword. So the whole temple system is mirroring this, where you bring your sacrifice to the gates of the temple, the gates of the tabernacle. You don't actually go in and then make your sacrifice.
Yes,
which is why the bronze altar is on the outside of the holy place.
On the outside, So you bring, it's in the external court. So you come and you offer your sacrifices, and then you go, and then he's saying that what often gets translated as crouching is actually really just the Hebrew word for lying. Like it's normally if you're like sleeping or lying dormant, that it's that word.
Okay.
And he's saying that what he's saying is sin is crouching at your door, but sin is lying at the door. Like as in you haven't offered a sin offering.
Right.
So why are you upset? You've done the wrong thing. You haven't offered the sin offering. It's still lying at the door.
Brilliant.
And so I think that I mean, I'm sure that people want to quibble translation issues, but that insofar as Mike Morales is right, he's backing up Klein's point.
Totally. And, there's so many things like that sort of click into gear when you start seeing the thing, which is kind of a no-brainer, really, if you think about it. Like, obviously, we need to see how it unfolds in connection with the later temple system and so forth. I think we've established, connected, right? I get that there are liberal theologians that want to look at the Isaianic theology in complete isolation from the Q's theology and this theology, but we're not going there. It's all connected. And so we've presupposed that point. So obviously when we think about Moses and the situation with Israel, the whole thing is reflective of what was going on. And what Klein only started off doing, really, but geniusly so, was saying, hey, this needs to double back and help you unpack Genesis 3. That it's all like this expositional layout so that you can come and exposit what's going on there and read it back in and so forth. And so I think that there's the whole matter of this being on a certain day, even that they would have taken this. There's a whole way to argue that from the translation. All these things that are otherwise just neglected or overlooked, or
on the Day of Atonement, you have to splash on the mercy seat. You have to splash it on the east side. You have to sprinkle the blood on the east side of the mercy seat in Leviticus 16. It's like, why? Why do you have to do it on the east side?
Yeah, right.
It's just Eden and all of those concepts.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So suddenly those little details become intelligible.
Yeah,
and even just so I'm just trying to find it quickly because it's really quite fascinating. Hang on. So I'm in chapter 4. Okay. Oh, there we go. Um, Ketz Yamim. Okay, so it was at the end of days that Cain brought the fruit. So that's like literally what it says, right? It was at the end of
Interesting.
days that Cain brought fruit. Now that means like the end of a time period, or it was at some point, but it could also very much mean it was at the end of the week, you
Sabbath.
know? Yeah. So, again, like you wouldn't, it's not explicit, whatever, but you're almost going, okay, you see, they have a whole little system going on already, which
Mhm.
actually is probably likely in light of the
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
that
They have a
they have
rhythm to their lives. I wonder what rhythm they would have followed.
and they and the fact that they have received this, like, I mean, they have not received this secondhand, right? This
Yeah.
whole system has been given directly from God, and yes, we're getting
Yeah.
the hyper abbreviated account
Yeah.
precisely because we get the later exposited account. So here we have something that is just hinting at a developed sacrificial system, where you
Well,
would
the other
bring.
thing that
Yeah,
Klein,
yeah,
the other thing that Klein really draws out about that is the whole calling out in the name of the Lord thing, like the people of the altar,
yeah, yeah,
you know, like that kind of like that's the identity now of
yeah.
the offspring of Eve, the offspring plural,
Yes, yes, yes,
they are the people of the altar. That's their
yes.
fundamental
And it's not
identity.
because
So
they
when they
started to call upon the name of the Lord for the first time or something,
no no
That's how
no
people
no
often read it, like, oh, finally people are starting to worship God. But no, no, this is this sacrificial system becomes so distinctive in the city of Cain that they are
yeah
known as the
yeah
people of the Lord. Yeah, they're the name bearers. They bear the name,
that's right
which becomes
yeah
an important idea as you go to Shem and the line of Shem
yeah.
and Cain, Israel, and so forth.
And it's
Yeah.
also interesting that if that you take that like they call in the name of the Lord, it sounds like a prayer thing. But then
Yes.
when you, as Klein traces it through, it's
Yeah.
actually an altar thing.
Yes.
So the
Yes.
calling
Yes.
on, well, and obviously the two go hand in hand.
Yes.
But the whenever you look at those references to calling on the name of the Lord, it's usually it's usually to do with they've just built an altar and then they call on the name of the Lord. And it's amazing to trace that through. And it's just a detail that you would never pick up. But Klein just jumps right on it. It's
Right.
amazing.
Totally. Totally. And then also just quickly while we're running up, people might not have thought about this, but yeah, as you say, they would have taken. I'm convinced they would have taken it to the gates of Eden. I mean, where else, right? That's where the presence of the Lord is established. That's where the fiery presence is. It also sort of helps you understand how the one offering was identified as that which was received. The fire came upon it. What fire are we talking about here? We're talking about
Yeah. Yeah.
this, and that fiery sword judgment, is also important. This fire, this blood sacrifice receives the judgment, from the sword that has banished them. And
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
becomes an incredibly
Yeah.
important point as you go forward, because why cut the pieces in two, and why do it? It's all this allusion to the sword judgment,
Yeah.
Circumcision,
circumcision, exactly. Ultimately,
Yeah.
the
cutting
cross
off
is.
from the land, cut off from the presence of the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, at the cross, what was happening is that sword ultimately slayed that curtain in two, effectively allowing these
Yeah.
cherubim to move to the side and creating this way back into Eden. So all of this imagery is setting you up for getting the riches of what's coming, not only in the Old Testament in the sacrificial system, but in terms of what Jesus fulfills. So it's probably a little bit more detailed than we had time for, but anyway, it's
And now for the Abrahamic covenant.
yeah. Well, I mean, maybe let's quickly jump through Noah, just in light of what we said last time. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that we now want to deal with the pre-diluvian Noahic covenant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In that year, we are seeing something that is not common grace, right? So pre-diluvian, as in before the flood, right? There is something going on with Noah. There are many exegetical details, I think, that show, when God speaks to Noah and talks about this covenant, he has reference to this thing that's already been set up. It uses a different type of language than afterwards, after the flood, to show that there is a previous covenant in view. Also, you have different pronouns, so to speak. You're not thinking about everyone generally, but second person pronouns in view, which is important. Again, you have the redemptive community. So whatever, and there again, it fits well within the obvious type that no one's wanting to back away from. That what happened in the ark, is really is the baptism that we receive, and it is our being kept safe through the redemptive judgment. The judgment is a redemptive judgment for us because it becomes the means through which we're carried to the new creation because of the work of Christ. And Noah himself then becomes kind of like an allusion to the one who earns the rest for us. You know, he does the work. He's blameless in his generation. He receives. He becomes the one who saves his people, and so points to Christ as the seed who would come. So there's that. Now let's jump to the Abrahamic covenant, just so we can take some ground. What do we need to say? I think that, what do you guys want to
Well,
talk
I mean,
about?
we've seen the establishment of the covenant of grace, and we've been given the promise of Genesis 3:15, and now we see a development in the covenant of grace. And this is a ratification, and so I guess just discussing the promissory nature of it, the unilateral nature of it.
Yes.
And yet there are some typological features that probably need to be highlighted as they relate between the Abrahamic and the Mosaic.
Yes.
So maybe just touching on some of those things.
Yeah, because I mean, this is where the big squabble happens, you know, for our listeners, I think, you know, with a lot of 1689 federalism as well. In that this
not only 1689 federalism, I think everyone has to answer the problem of how do you square the Abrahamic covenant with the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah, that's true.
Everyone has to answer that question, and so you've got a dispensational answer, which is usually radical discontinuity.
Yes.
You've got the 1689 federalist answer, which basically sees them as two parts of a whole in a progressive sense. I think Klein does join them at a typological level, though definitely sees them in a discontinuity, as Paul does.
Yeah.
You know, and so
and then the other side is, well, I mean, traditionally it hasn't been what I meant was, like, in Reformed theology, you know, it hasn't been much of a squabble in the sense that it's obviously the covenant of grace, right?
Yes.
But it's only really when you get the pesky Baptists involved that you get the squabble, you know, to begin with. So let's let that be on our own heads at that regard, at that level. But what we're saying, perhaps that is different from a lot of Baptists, be it dispensational or 1689 federalist, is that we do see this as a fundamentally gracious covenant.
Yes.
I don't think it is the covenant of grace, in that I don't think the new covenant is the covenant of grace. The covenant of grace is a theological, systematic construct. None of these single covenants are the covenant of grace, in my view. But, you know, for Klein,
it's a bit like none of them are, but all of them are at the same time. Like
none of them are. I mean, so I just the only language that works is that you have exegetical covenants that everyone sees. Okay. No one, like, ranging from dispensational all the way through to like hypertheonomy. We're all seeing the same data in front of us. And then it's a matter of going, well, is this a fundamentally kind of like, is it doing a gracious thing or a works thing? You know, just leave out the construct for now. Just think about that. And that's where you immediately start getting some differences. And then another level of difference would be, how do you then systematize all of this? So that's where we come up with words that aren't in the Bible, that are systematic in nature. We've got a covenant of works, we've got a covenant of grace, we've got a covenant of redemption, and then it's a matter of piecing that all together. And the way you would piece it together would depend on how you've classified these exegetical covenants. So that's a little bit different from the two mistakes I see happening, one within 1689 federalism and the other within like, let's say, standard Presbyterian kind of overly continuity sort of oriented theology, where they're basically equating the Abrahamic covenant with the covenant of grace, or they're equating the new covenant with the covenant of grace. So that's you know, either one of those two mistakes is happening. I say you solve the whole thing if you equate neither of them with the covenant of grace, but answer the question as to what they're doing, and then how they formulate. Yeah, how they formulate the covenant of grace. So in the Abrahamic covenant case, like, I would say there is, I mean, I don't know how it can be disputed legitimately that this is not a fundamentally gracious covenant. Of course it is for Klein, because he said, listen, if God does if he takes the oath, it's gracious, right? Yeah. So what do we see? Abraham's sleeping, God's doing all the work. I mean, this is like, there's just no quibble, right? On that basis. how you just have a different system of categorization, I suppose, to make this a covenant of works. You'd have to look at the later call to obey and otherwise be put out.
So I think the verse that stood out is Genesis 22, verse 18, which says, "And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice."
Right. So for me, to my ears, that is like the pinnacle of the covenant of redemption, because that is doing what Noah did. That's the covenant of grant arrangement. He's blameless. He's doing his thing. He deserves what he gets typologically. So at the typal outworking of this whole thing, he is showing exactly how the covenant of grace works. He is mirroring the covenant of redemption at this typal level, so as to, bring forth. So, as Klein puts something like, he doesn't earn the salvation of the elect, but or the salvation of God's people, but he earns their place in Canaan to bring about the Messiah. And this becomes this is all undergirded by God's promise of grace, but it's the typal outworking of that. And so I think, to my ears, I hear stuff like that and I'm going, amen, because that is like most important.
For me, I think that's the most significant contribution by Klein to the Abrahamic covenant, because what you've got, like 1689 Federalists, they basically look at that legal language and they say this proves that the Abrahamic and the Mosaic are basically one.
Yeah.
And that you can't make the Abrahamic part of the covenant of grace or the covenant of grace administratively.
Yeah.
And so they push back at the Presbyterians, pointing to the legal language. And then you've got your mono-covenantalists who come along and they say, you see, the covenant of grace has legal language.
Yeah.
And so our obedience does matter.
Yeah.
And they merge it into the substance of the covenant of grace.
Yeah.
But we see it typologically where it's pointing backwards to Adam and through Adam to the covenant of redemption and forward to Christ.
Yes.
So there's a typological imposition that's added at that point.
Is it also,
that we have to recognize as type language.
Is it also like a failure to see the significance of Genesis 15, exegetically? That actually what's happening in Genesis 15 isn't on the same level as what you might find later in Genesis 17, Genesis 21, where you've got language about circumcision
within what has already happened. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the fundamental problem. You can't just go straight to that. There's this thing.
Exactly, because you've got Genesis 12, which is outlining the promises, which is really just, in some sense, providing more detail to what we've already seen.
Exactly.
But at another level, when you get to Genesis 15, there is a ceremony that's taking place there.
Yeah.
That is clearly, Klein says, is clearly a kind of a ratification, a formal ratification.
Yes.
And so when you get to like Hebrews, for example, the book of Hebrews, it's looking back to that and it's saying, listen, we have two unshakable things. You have the promise confirmed with an oath, and that can only be talking about Genesis 15.
I know, totally.
So that, I mean, I think exegetically, you then say, oh yeah, okay, well, Genesis 15, yes, that could be read as a unilateral thing or whatever. But then if you go to Genesis 17, then you see that actually it's more complicated. No, hang on,
because that's typological 15, and it's outworking of the covenant of grace. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah. So in my thinking, I see Genesis 15 as, in terms of synecdoche, this is part for the whole. This is a formal ratification, if you like, the formal ratification of a larger.
Exactly. I mean, it can't repeat everything every time something to do with works and typology is mentioned. It'd be crazy to ask that of the text, number one. So think about how it's flowed out, though. You've got this like building up of the covenant of grace that we've talked about, and then you get through the flood, etc., and then you get to Abraham, and then this kickoff with really what amounts to the Great Commission. So when Matthew 28 happens, all that is actually is Jesus going, all right, it's done. Now the blessing goes out to all nations, So take it, go with the blessing given that was promised in Genesis 12. That's all it is, right? That's all he's doing. It's like that thing is now done, so go. And so that alone for me goes, all right, we are definitely without quibble dealing with the thing that Jesus came to do, right? And then that's the thing that now couches everything that goes. The next, as you put it, the next thing is a ceremony to ratify that promise that is really an expansion of.
And that's because of progressive revelation. It's being developed.
Exactly. So
putting some furniture in the room now.
So it was.
But I don't like one.
Yeah.
So there is one important development that can't happen, according to Galatians 3, which is that the oath or the covenant that's been made can't be changed once it's been ratified. So like So Paul's argument, which is
Yes.
explicitly to say that, listen, whatever happened with Abraham wasn't adapted, like it wasn't changed on the fly when Moses came along.
Yes,
that was done.
Yes.
So in the same way, a hermeneutic that reads Genesis 15 and then it compares it with Genesis 17 and Genesis 21 or 22 and says, actually, this thing's just been developed or changed in that way, I think flies in the face of that principle. That actually,
can't develop it against its original principle.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. No, that's great. And then the ceremony happens, which is like 100. So if we're thinking in terms of Matthew 28 and then the ceremony in between is like, I don't like the language of inauguration of the covenant of grace. Then I think it's the ratification, as Paul talks about. It's like a confirmation. It's a covenantal confirmation of what has already been in play. And now in light of that promise of Genesis 12, and there it is. I mean, it's exactly what you would expect, right? God is in light of what we know about the cross, he's vowing to take the road of blood, the way of blood. He's entering in. Blood. He's taking the vow. He's the legs of the sacrificial. Everything that happens in Exodus, the smoke of pillar, the pillory cloud, and the fiery pillar. It's like these two legs walking through the covenant. This is why Exodus will happen. This is why the redemption will happen. This is why the ultimate Exodus will happen. It's all because God vows to do everything while Abraham's sleeping, and it can't do a thing for himself. And then it's true that we're not quite at the fulfillment of the new covenant yet. So there's still this matter of having to put together a Jewish nation, right? Hence, Genesis 17 and the whole need for circumcision and the mark upon the Jewish is the male reproduction organ, to set apart the Jewish nationality, the Abrahamic race,
physical line from which the Savior will come.
Right. I mean, like because we're not there yet, right? That's the only reason. It's got a typological element to it, because we haven't just like jumped straight to the new covenant. Jesus isn't the next one that's born, so that's why you need that stuff. But that's not like undoing everything that just has so powerfully been set in place. That's just saying, all right, now I'm putting this people together, and you must do this, otherwise you're not part of this people at a typological level. And then, even the fact that the seed is being marked with the knife sacrifice, the sword judgment, again, like let's not that's still very much pointing to this central outworking of the promise. And then you get to the whole, because you was Genesis 22, right?
Yeah, Genesis 22,
18, where yes, because you have done this, now you will get this. I mean, that needs to be understood, as Klein says, as this layer on this layer. That's the
typological imposition.
Yes, that's the layer of the cake that's upon this deeper substrata of grace.
Because if you hear these words spoken to Christ, in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed because you have obeyed my voice, it becomes very intelligible.
Like not only it becomes the only way to understand it.
Exactly.
So it's like
it's not like a way of redesigning a covenant to incorporate works. It's a way of pointing to Christ.
Exactly. And that typology would not make sense unless it was couched in the thing that had happened before.
Yes.
Leading up to that point. So yeah. I mean, either
as someone has said, when it comes to Klein, there are layers. There's layers.
Yeah.
Klein's like an onion. There's layers.
In many senses. Yeah. Good. So I mean that gets us past the Abrahamic covenant. Let's quickly jump to the Mosaic, because
just quickly.
Not
much to say here. This will be very fast.
the big thing that's different, of course, is that in the Abrahamic covenant, there's no cultic regulation. There's no, Abraham does make treaties with neighboring sort of leaders and so forth, and all of that is in place. There's no forbiddance of any of that. They are to be like, in many senses, the Sethite lineage and the Canaanite lineage dwelling together in the cities. They don't have their separate cities. They're tolerated sojourners, as Klein put it.
Business agreements,
right, and they're resolving things as peacefully as possible, sticking to altar worship and so forth. You see that very much the case in the patriarchs, right? They don't lodge war upon the enemies. They're very reasonable in the way they go about it. Okay, fine, you have that. Well, let's just make a covenant and just stay out of each other's way and so forth. Anyway, so then you get to the Mosaic covenant, and one of the big things you see is, woof, not only is this like two people entering into this covenant, like God and the people, and not just God making the vow, and they're not sleeping, and this is a works grace antithesis going on here, but also the level of involvement. There's this. It seems like there's an obvious suspension of all that common grace stuff we've been talking about, and that now every part of life is regulated, and every part, not only at that second table of the law, last six commandments level, but vertical dimension as well. The initial commandments, every part of it is in place. There is no allowance for any kind of toleration, so to speak, with anyone that goes against the law. And so all of this is just, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to see that. That's just like this radical contrast that emerges. So you've got to, it seems to me, the most intuitive thing in the world to say, all right, well, at that point, then there's something different that we need to consider, And I think one of the things that Klein brings out is that, we don't have a grant covenant arrangement where the layer of typology is, there is a works dimension in the layer of typology, but it's not like the grant covenant arrangement where, because of the thing already achieved, now God promises, right? Because, Noah has done this thing, therefore he will enter in. Because Abraham has done this thing, therefore he's promised this stuff. Because David, we'll get to David later, has done this stuff, therefore he'll get this stuff. Here we have the same works dynamic at the typal level, but now it's to replicate the covenant of works in the garden, and it's go right.
It's not obedience done; it's obedience yet to be done.
Yet to be done, right? And if you do, then you will get this blessing in the land, and so forth. The whole thing is really designed to kind of replicate or to showcase the problem of man without this champion, this one who does the work for him. Which then, maybe
just throwing a layer on there, the Sabbath given as a sign of this covenant reinforces that works principle. You work, work, then you enter into the rest after you worked.
Very important.
The Sabbath underlines
which is
that
why
principle.
We don't keep it in the new covenant as a
and going back to the Noahic covenant as well, you've got this counterpart thing again. Remember we talked about the rainbow as the counterpart of the Sabbath. You've got kind of, what is the goal of this covenant? Well, in this instance, there is, we said there's a notable absence of the Sabbath in the Noahic covenant. Now here it is in all its glory again, and if you can do this,
highly enforced,
you can get
applied.
that. Exactly. So and the point is that this day was meant to communicate a cessation of labor. And just like it was in the original covenant of work. So the whole thing is really important at that level.
Maybe one other thing to talk about Mosaic, the covenant, is the eschatological intrusion through the laws of Israel and the death penalty applications and the holy wars of Israel.
Yes. So. Because what's happening in Israel, again, is not what's happening. So remember, we spoke about what happens when Noah starts his family and then one of his kids start going rogue, and then his descendants start, do they execute him because he doesn't worship the right God? No, we said no, because that's the whole thing. Don't do that. It's being delayed until the end, right? So don't get in the way of that. Don't try and anticipate that judgment. Don't bring it into premature crisis point. Well, it's exactly the opposite as you get into the Mosaic covenant now, because the whole thing is a proleptic realization of that judgment. It's kind of like a intrusion, as Klein calls it. It's the end, can't wait for the end, and intrudes into this moment. And then the judgment is now no longer with flood, but with theocratic army. And the judgment is, being carried out as a kind of type of the kingdom to come in its final reality. So there are many things going on, all of which reinforce, as Klein says, none of it is to be the ideal for the church at this point. It's the ideal in the sense that it showcases what we will have when Jesus comes back as the true Joshua to kill off all of his enemies and bring us into the land. But in terms of the ideal that we uphold in our polity and so forth, no.
But
it's not at
you
all.
see it play out in ways like the death penalty becomes excommunication or
Yes,
church discipline, and you see
exactly.
it in the sense that those kind of holy war things become spiritual warfare. So
Yes.
they were battling these literal giants, these
Mm.
tyrants, these Goliaths, whereas we do that. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, and so there is, in some sense, it's kind of foreshadowing the Christian life as well as
Right. Right.
the bigger eschatological things.
Right. There was this spiritual application that could be made throughout. Yeah, totally. Um, one thing we forgot to mention with Abraham, another thing I think people run into as a problem there is that when you get to the Davidic covenant, there's this parity, right? So if you have a problem with seeing the Abrahamic covenant as a covenant that is gracious fundamentally, and you have a problem with that because Abraham is said to deserve something.
Yeah.
That means when you get to the Davidic covenant, you can't call it a covenant of grace either, or part of the gracious covenant arrangement. You have to relegate it completely to the Mosaic covenant, which for me is very problematic because my goodness, like the half the New Testament are like highlighting the fact that, this is basically, he is the Mashiach, the son of David. This is the one, this is the Davidic covenant now brought to its fulfillment. And the reason they do that is because the problem of the Mosaic covenant has set up that unless we have one who can obey for us, we will not enter into a victory over the enemies and an entrance into Sabbath rest, like the time of Solomon and the glorious Pax Romana of Israel, so to speak, and yet it's explicitly said, David, because you have done these things, you've defeated your enemies, you've killed off you've done all these things, therefore you will have now this time of rest. And
we have to read that through a Christological lens, and which is the same with the Psalms, isn't it? The imprecatory Psalms, the Psalms where he's pleading his own righteousness. Without a Christological lens, I mean, we become monocovenantalists.
But even at the fundamental level of just not reading the Bible and thinking that you're the hero of the story, you know what I mean? So it's like even just at that basic level where you're reading the story about Noah. And we, like we watch a film, we like to think we are Maximus from Gladiator or whatever. But like, reality is where the guy who dies in the first scene, he's tripped over his buddy's spear and he's dead,
Yes.
And so like when we read the Bible, we tend to do that. So with Noah, we think, oh, we are Noah in the story. And so when you get to the things like, oh, on account of his faithfulness or because he was blameless, God remembered him, we think, oh, well, that must play out in my life as well. But even at that basic level, it doesn't work because we're just making that mistake of imposing ourselves the hero of the story. And if you recognize that you're doing that, then the question becomes, well, if I'm not the hero, who is? And then that leads inevitably to saying, well, look, these figures, Noah, David, and so on, Abraham, they are obviously foreshadowing Christ,
and then you read Christ. David slaying Goliath,
yeah, that's right.
It's not about you defeating your giants.
Yeah, you're the guy cowering
giants.
Too chicken to get on the field.
Yeah, we're the fearful Israelites on the mountain watching from afar.
And it's so powerful because there he is, like Goliath is literally, from the sons of Anakim, descended from the literal like genealogy of the serpent, and he's got the chainmail that are like scales of serpentine chainmail, and then David makes him eat dust, like literally face first, and chops off his head,
crushes his head,
crushes his head, chops it off, defeats it. You got all these things. Even just the way, I forget now, but the way the Hebrew's wording, Goliath calls for the man in between who will stand as the mediator for his people, and so all of these things that are just all click into gear when you get this right. So I think certainly, I think you must see that there is a necessary continuity in the Davidic covenant, in that the focus principle of works is in place as you put the Mosaic covenant together. Like you wouldn't understand that you need a champion who does the thing unless you had a covenant of works that goes before in the Mosaic covenant. And so there is a continuity in that because he's doing it, but at that level, there's also a continuity in the new covenant because we're still getting it by works, It's just that not our works. It's
Yeah.
the works of
So
the true
it's
David.
added in a subservient sense, not in a dominant sense.
Yes, exactly.
It's an overlay
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
or an underlay, whichever.
Yeah. Yeah.
To the main theme, which is the covenant of grace.
Right.
Aren't there sort of two things going on with the Davidic covenant in the sense that you've got elements of the covenant of grace, but you've also got elements of the covenant of works. The way I've kind of always understood it, I don't know what you think about this or how much this aligns with Klein's thinking, but the way
maybe
I've kind
just
of
a
always
listener warning.
it,
It's very late at night for Andre, so whatever comes out of his mouth,
we can't
I am
we can't
and
endorse.
feeling controversial.
So we've warned the
I'm
audience.
feeling controversial. Yeah. So serpent seed theology, right?
Oh, come on.
I've been rethinking it. No, okay. So you got like with the whole David thing, you've got those two elements. So there's the promise that there will always be an offspring, there will be this offspring of David that will be there for eternity, and that seems to be utterly graciously made. Like
2 Samuel 7 verse 13 and 14 area,
that exactly. And so there is that, but then there is also the subsequent promise that look, when these guys mess up, there's going to be punishment. And surely that is echoing the kind of covenant.
That's kind of what I was saying earlier. Yeah, that there is, it's all happening within the rubric that's been set up by the Mosaic covenant. So
that's right.
So if the king fails, then the people fail. So there's a focus principle, but he can also fail. So he just succeeded and therefore brought in Sabbath, but then afterwards they fail all the time. Yeah. And so hence the exile. But they go into exile as a sort of, a development of both the covenant of works brought into focus by the king and the failure. And it just really emphasizes the need for maybe a good segue into the new covenant, right? And the prophets, because there they are. They go off into exile. It's really another end of the world, right? It's the exile of the garden. It's
cut off from the presence of God, out of the east gate.
Yeah.
Glory of the Lord has departed.
You only really get why they were singing on the river at the rivers of Babylon and weeping, because you only get that thing and when you get how severe this was. It wasn't just like,
it wasn't a sentimental, it would be so much better to be in Israel.
No, it wasn't the Chinese.
They aren't only mourning their lot as refugees.
Yeah, it's not like the Chinese taking over, New Zealand and then relocating us to like China and Beijing and so forth. And then we're like, oh, we really miss New Zealand, No, it's
spiritual mourning.
We're cut off from, we're like Adam and Eve again, after the fall. Yeah.
My church in South Africa, we had some Zimbabweans who were refugees in South Africa. And I walked into the church one day and they were having like a prayer meeting and they were all singing by the rivers of Babylon, basically. Yeah. Well, no, they weren't singing the Boney M version. They were singing, they were singing a hymn, but it was basically the psalm. And it was kind of, they had adopted it to describe their own situation.
Did you take the opportunity to preach against that bad theology? Or
no, man, at the time I was fully into it.
Did you show them that they didn't have the verse about dashing babies' heads against rocks?
I didn't. I was into it. I was totally in support at that point. I've grown a bit since then.
So
corrected some of my theology.
Now, yeah, they are, but this is important because now, when this is like Jeremiah comes along, right? The prophet of the new covenant. Of course, we know this. They're in exile. Yeah. This is like terrible. And the way that Jeremiah talks about the new covenant is in terms of a new creation. He talks about what's just happened to them in the exile as a return to the chaos of the waters, right? So it's a decreation, it's a flood, it's the everything. So
the tohu vabohu.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense unless, they're seeing these things in a connected way, right? And they're going, look, it is now, Adam has become the Israel, and the Israel has now recapitulated the fall of Adam, in the sense that Isaiah has said, now they have transgressed the covenant, just like Adam. They're as guilty. And so off they go. And then the prophets emerge and they start talking about this new covenant as there will come a new creation. There will come a new covenant, a new humanity, a return from this exile into the land. And this is the language of Jeremiah 31, which we love, because of the new covenant and because we're Baptists, because this is where it starts talking about this is what we're to expect, not the exile ultimately, as it the return from exile as it happens under the decree of Cyrus, and after the 70 years, but as that reflects ultimately its eschatological finality in the new covenant. So when we get to the new covenant, we're saying that yes, there is a continuity and administration, of course, but the discontinuity is such that, not that we have an over-realized eschatology. We're not saying that we're in heaven and everyone who is part of the new covenant is, or at least at church, is certainly part of the new covenant and so forth. But we are saying that where it starts at that point, our instruction about the new covenant has been proclaimed and sort of driven along by this prophetic announcement. And so we are at very minimum to model
Amen.
our ecclesiological gathering not on Old Jerusalem under the Sinaitic covenant, but on New Jerusalem, as foreshadowed in its final eschatological state. So in its consummate state,
100%.
We're not there yet, but we're modeling it on that, and that becomes the key distinction.
Can I throw another layer on there? So going back to Jeremiah 31, this is what stood out to me. I was just reading this week. In those days, they shall no longer say, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So this is just before the announcement of the new covenant in verse 31. So just before that announcement, there's another principle. So God's looking forward to the day of the new covenant, and he's deconstructing the way in which he's presently worked with Israel. That generational curse principle. The fathers have sinned and the children's teeth have been set on edge. So God is deliberately pointing forward. He's telling us to expect a dismantling of the corporate principle in the future when the new covenant arrives. And so we should be expecting a change in the way in which we administer things in the new covenant community, namely who we baptize, who is seen as part of the covenant community, how we deliberately identify the visible church, etc.
Now, probably I should add. I should have added this before. We need to just say this. This is not Klein's view.
So we're riffing off Klein now.
So we have morphed into. We've actually, what we've done in the book is merged a lot of chapter 6 with chapter 3.
Yeah, we're standing on the shoulders of giants now.
Yeah. So let's just, for anyone listening trying to get ahead of is that what this is saying in chapter 3? No, it's not. It's not what it's saying in chapter 3. But we're podcasting over here, folks. That's what we're doing. We're freeballing.
We're freestyling.
Yeah.
Listen, what I'm concerned about at the moment is how I break the generational curse over my life. Because Nick, you're confusing me, man. Can I even do it? How do I do it?
Galatians 3:13. Jesus took the curse. Done.
Okay, done. That's great. Well, that's a lot easier. So that principle, because actually I think you do see it in chapter 3, Mike. You highlight how Klein is basically saying that what happened in the Mosaic covenant was the principle, the covenant of works principle that was individual becomes corporate.
Yes.
And so now in the new covenant, that corporate principle becomes individual, but not on the level. Yeah.
Right. Now, and that's true. And I think and this is a biased statement, so I'm not claiming anything. Otherwise, I know people will disagree with me on this, and fine. I disagree with you friendly and in a friendly way and whatnot. But in my opinion and in my view, a lot of what Klein is saying is leading to a two-kingdom position. Yeah. And a two-kingdom position.
If Klein had lived long enough, he would have become a Baptist. We all know it.
Well,
just kidding.
He might not have. I think he might not have, because he had such a convincing way of staying within his understanding. He actually did work it out. He might have had to work some further elements out as to how it doesn't go Constantinian and so forth. But at the same time, I think he was convinced. I don't.
But he wasn't a typical Presbyterian. We can't say that.
No, so he would have taken another line of argument for sure. But what I was saying though is that what this is all leading to, and we should probably finish with this, is a two kingdom position, which we can't help but see as a very standard Baptistic view of things, right? Because historically it is true that the Baptists were like the default two kingdom guys. It's just how it was. So there is just this enmeshing of things, and so as Baptists, this is one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of what gives way to kind of ultimately this view of of the church and the world and so forth, that we like about Klein. Now, I realize that's not why everyone likes Klein, and whatever, but you should know that up front. This is what makes us tick, and this, we're Baptist Kleinians over here, so that's kind of why we're going to read all this back into it and just have some fun in terms of talking about it.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a good idea just for the sake of tracking along with the book, because this does transition well into like thinking about chapter 4 and whatnot. At the end, I conclude there by just saying, all right, now just in case you hadn't pieced this together, this is how this works. This is why this gives rise to two kingdom theology, or this is why Mandrinen has got hold of this and moved with this, rightly so. Because at the one level, there's this, we're saying the covenant of redemption, right? The covenant of redemption in Klein's thought is this workspace thing that includes all the cultural stuff as well, right? And so, Adam needed to do this stuff. He failed to do the stuff. Now there's a second Adam that's also very workspace and includes all the cultural stuff as well. And he did it. The second Adam has come. So we wouldn't start taking elements of the works of the covenant of redemption on ourselves in a way that negates the covenant of redemption. We shouldn't do that with culture either. That's the first point. The second point is that there is this obviously clear common grace covenant in Klein's theology, which, as we spelled out last week and a little bit now, this creates a stage upon which the drama of redemption moves forward. It means that we suspend, any judgment based on those things that men deserve judgment for are suspended right until the end. That means there is a bit of space for this whole thing. And everything in the common grace covenant is to flourish humanity insofar as it supports that central drama of the covenant of grace. And then this time, what we've looked at here is this covenant of grace. But what we're saying is this two-level typology is crucial, because it means that you take the Mosaic covenant and you don't see it as part of the normative outworking of the covenant of grace on that stage of common grace. Rather, you see it as an intrusion and type of the kingdom to come, and really a reflection of what it is that Christ has done for us in fulfilling those works that we couldn't do for ourselves. So it demonstrates the problem again with Adam and shows us the need for grace. So all of that works well with two kingdom theology, because that really forms the building blocks for it. It does not work well with any kind of theonomy. It goes dead against any kind of monocovenantalism or theonomy or anything like that.
Yeah. And as you get to the end of, before Christ ascends into heaven, he gives the Great Commission. And he gives the Great Commission not to the world. He doesn't give the Great Commission to the Roman Emperor. He gives the Great Commission to the church. It's the job of the church to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
And that is on top of a common grace covenant that a refracted cultural mandate applies to all of humanity, including Christians. So we have a job as citizens of this world to fulfill a refracted cultural mandate, while as the church, we've been given the Great Commission.
Yeah, amen.
And so there's our two kingdom emphasis right there.
Totally. So that sets us up well moving forward, in that just said this goes against a certain grouping of theologies. We're going to see those theologies next. We're going to look at, the next things that come. What does Klein say about those other ones? And let's think about, we'll look next, I think, just at theonomy. And then we'll go on to the next ones. I think that's the way to do it.
Brilliant.
But then also what you were just saying now, I think will be highlighted nicely by the time we get to chapter 6, awesome. However many sessions that is away. So if you want more of that, stay tuned, because we're getting there. Look at us go. Run, Forrest. We're doing
Proud of you guys. Proud of you guys.
No, I'm proud of you guys. All right. So with that in mind, here's the jingle.